fired for protecting a vet's dog. And just 60 minutes later, the Marines arrived. Not for coffee, but to defend what was right. This isn't breaking news. This is one of those veteran stories you can't ignore. An ordinary woman, a simple decision, and a system forced to change. At Justice for Veterans, we tell stories like this. Because justice doesn't just live in courtrooms. It lives in the small, timely acts of courage. Today's story begins with a headshake and ends with a march no one expected. Grace Whitman isn't someone who seeks attention, but anyone who walks into Riverside Coffee knows her. She remembers every customer's name, who shakes a little, who always orders black coffee, who served where. The daughter of a former Marine, Grace grew up on war stories and the aftermath nightmares. She understands that silence can speak volumes, that averted eyes often hide the deepest pain. So, every Wednesday morning, she reserves a quiet corner, a small American flag, a few wooden chairs for Veterans Coffee Hour. No ads, no fanfare, just a space for those who once held a rifle to sit down and be heard. But then, a stranger walked in, and everything began to shift. He entered like a shadow, silver hair, worn coat, and eyes fixed on the ground. Raymond Carter just called him. Ray didn't talk much, but he was never alone. Beside him walked Buddy, a golden dog with deep brown eyes, always matching Ray's steps like he could read every breath. Once, a cup clattered behind the counter. Ray flinched, froze. But Buddy gently placed his paw on Ray's knee, looked up, no bark. Ray exhaled as if pulled back from a distant battlefield. Grace saw it all. She didn't ask, just placed a black coffee in front of him, same as always. The cafe held its breath, then returned to normal. No one knew. Buddy's first bark would shake the entire coffee industry. Ray never made eye contact. No one knew where he'd been or what he carried inside. But Grace felt it, not through words, but in how Ray placed his cup-like, disarming a mine, in how Buddy pressed his ears softly to Ray's leg, a quiet anchor for a drifting mind. One Wednesday, Grace saw Buddy nudge Ray's hand. Ray smiled, for the first time. She didn't ask, but that night, she reread the ADA America's Disability Act and printed a copy to hang behind the counter. On it, a small line bolded, "Service dogs are not pets, they are medical companions." Grace thought she was prepared, until Inspector Harold Green walked in. Monday morning, not a Wednesday. The cafe was quiet, just a few old men reading newspapers. The door swung open. A man in a stiff suit entered, badge gleaming. Harold Green, Federal Health Inspector. No greetings, no questions. He circled, taking notes. His eyes stopped on Buddy, lying by Ray as always. He froze. "This dog is not permitted in food service areas." Ray looked up, fear flashing in his eyes. Buddy stood, pressing close. Grace stepped forward, calm. "He has the right. Under ADA law, that's a service dog." Harold didn't flinch. "If you don't remove the dog, I will shut this place down." The silence was heavy, and Grace didn't step back. "I will not remove Buddy," Grace said, eyes locked on Harold. "He's not just a customer, he's a veteran with PTSD. Buddy is legal, essential, and protected." Harold tapped his notebook. "You're refusing a direct order from a federal inspector?" "I'm following the law. The ADA protects their right, including the right to have a service dog." The cafe froze. A customer set down a cup. The clink rang loud. Ray bowed his head, gripping Buddy's leash. Buddy growled softly. No bark, but didn't look away from Harold. Harold closed his notebook. "I'll report this to the district. Be ready." He turned to leave. But later that afternoon, it wasn't an inspector who arrived. It was Regional Director Rick Doyle. Rick Doyle arrived at 3 p.m. Gray suit, red tie, eyes devoid of hesitation. No questions, no explanations. He said one sentence: "Grace Whitman, you're suspended, effective immediately." She removed her apron, placed it gently on the counter. No one in the cafe moved. Ray stood, hands trembling. Buddy stepped forward, shielding him from Rick. "We did nothing wrong," Grace said. "We stood for what's right." Rick replied without blinking. "This is a business decision, not a place for compassion theater." Grace stayed silent, but in the corner, an older woman had already raised her phone recording everything, and she was no ordinary customer. The woman's name was Linda Hayes. Silver hair, elegant, usually came for iced tea. No one knew her husband. That night, sitting in her car, Linda opened the video and hit share. A clip under a minute. A young manager fired for defending a veteran and his service dog. Linda sent it to one person. Colonel William Bill Hayes, commander of a nearby Marine base, her husband. He read the message. His eyes stopped at 3 words. Buddy, PTSD, fired. He needed nothing more. He stood, and within 60 minutes, the base was in motion. A convoy left the gates. Destination, Riverside Coffee. 59 minutes after the video was sent, the glass door of Riverside Coffee swung open. One pair of combat boots entered, then another, then a whole line. Customers looked up and held their breath. Colonel William Bill Hayes' full dress uniform, medals gleaming, led a squad of United States Marines. No weapons, but silence louder than gunfire. He marched to the center of the cafe, stopped at the counter, turned to Rick Doyle, who was halfway out the door. "I have one question," the colonel said, voice steady, deliberate. "Who fired Grace Whitman?" From that moment on, the cafe was never just a cafe again. Rick turned back, forcing a smile. I was just following protocol. It's an internal matter." Colonel Hayes didn't move. He pulled a document from his jacket, placed it firmly on the counter. Full printout of the Americans with Disabilities Act Service Dog section. "You violated this. And more importantly, you disrespected the honor of a man who served." Ray stood silently at the corner, eyes glassy. Buddy sat close, gaze fixed on the colonel. "Grace doesn't need to justify herself," he continued. "We're here to clarify she was right. You were not." Rick looked around. Every eye was on him. Then someone walked in. No one expected it. It was Linda Hayes, the woman who filmed it all. Linda stood beside her husband, silent. She played the video. "We did nothing wrong. We stood for what's right," Grace's voice echoed, clear, raw. The cafe went still. Rick swallowed hard. Colonel Hayes turned to Harold Greeneth, inspector, now back at the scene. "You're under internal suspension, effective immediately." Then to Rick, "You'll be retrained on Ada law and begin working under Grace Whitman's supervision." Rick stood frozen. No objections. Online, the clip hit 4 million views, and at corporate headquarters, an emergency meeting was called. A memo was drafted. Mandatory ADA. Service dog training across the entire franchise. 1 week later, at the Marine base, flags fluttered. Grace stood tall in the courtyard. Colonel Hayes handed her an official letter. "We want you to lead our veteran and service dog support program." Grace was stunned. "We don't just need leadership," he said. "We need heart like yours." She accepted, began training staff, holding PTSD workshops, teaching Ada law and canine roles. But every Wednesday, Grace returned to Riverside Coffee. Now, the cafe had a new wall lined with photos of veterans and their dogs. In the center, a weathered picture. A young soldier standing beside a military dog, Grace's father. Beneath it, a small plaque. "Welcome all who served on 2 legs or 4. Wednesday. Veterans Coffee Hour was more crowded than usual. Chairs close together, soft laughter over stirring spoons. Ray sat in his usual corner, but this time, he stood. The room quieted. Ray spoke. "I was a special ops soldier. In 2007, I pulled a wounded buddy from the fire zone." His hands trembled. "I was awarded the Silver Star, but I never told anyone." His voice cracked. "I survived, but I wasn't living. Not until Buddy. And not until Grace." An old veteran with a cane stood, placed a hand on Ray's shoulder. "We all need someone to be heard." Ray sat back down. eyes glassy. But this time, it was relief. Riverside Coffee is no longer just a cafe. It's a classroom, a training center, a place of healing. Rick Doyle, the man who once fired Grace, now sat in the front row, surrounded by 12 veterans, listening closely. On the table before him, the entry test for ADA training. His hand shook as he read the first question. Are service dogs protected as part of medical care under federal law? He marked. Yes. Grace walked in. Her eyes held no anger-only purpose. We've all made mistakes, she said. What matters is who's willing to relearn, to stand again. Rick stood. For the first time, he bowed his head, not out of fear, but understanding. And at the back of the class, Ray and Buddy sat watching quietly, but with pride. I'm not a lawyer, not a warrior, just someone who serves coffee and believes if someone once sacrificed for this country, they deserve to be treated with honor. I lost my job for protecting a dog, but what I gained was a community, justice. Ray is no longer a quiet shadow. Rick is no longer above everyone. And I am no longer standing alone. At Justice for Veterans, we don't tell stories for tears. We tell them to remind people. Justice doesn't come from weapons. It comes from small, choices brave, timely ones. If you believe that too, comment. I stand with them, because once they stood for us.